Okay, so hopefully you recall we were working on our app to determine whether or not you could run for president or not. So we're going to go ahead and start off with that same application. Now, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and I've saved that solution, and I'm going to go ahead and open it. And I'll use the recent projects and solutions to find it. You may recognize recent files from Word, which would be, oh yeah, I was working on a document this morning, let me go back to it. Well, it has that, which I could work on a single file, but of course, often my work involves multiple files, and they're all packaged into a solution. So I want to go back to the solution I was working on, and it manages and contains all those files as a group. So let's go ahead and open this up. And there's my check eligibility application as it was. If you recall, we had managed to get it to do what we wanted to as far as check, but we also knew that it had some shortcomings. We knew that if the person entered like an E here, we were going to end up with an error, right? So that's not the prettiest thing to happen to our user. We don't like that. So one thing we want to do is we want to be able to constrain what they can actually put in those boxes. Now look, I'm going to go ahead, it crashed, and I'm going to go ahead and stop it. I don't want to try to continue it. So I don't want them to be able to put anything but numbers in here. And right now they can enter anything. There are ways we can do, many ways to restrict that sort of thing. But one of the things that happens is, as we know, like from a button, there's all these events that you could potentially handle. So one of the events we can handle is a key press event. That is, I'm typing on the keyboard, and that is being handled by this text box. It's being sent to this text box. That means that it's the active item, and the key gets hit, and therefore this box is asked to handle it and do something with it. By default, what it does is add it to its text. Well, of course, that's great under normal circumstances, except for us, we only want numbers. So let's see, maybe we can change that. So let's go ahead and add this here. Now, I want to show you something now. Now I've added this. If I try to delete it from here, if I delete this, that is going to cause some problems. But I want to show it to you to show what happens. So I'm going to go back to my designer, and it's like, oh my God, you've done something horrible. Of course, you can read the instructions. But what's happened is it expects this handler to be there, and it's not. So if you go back over here, you probably can find the actual code that's problematic. And there it is. So I can delete this handler, which would solve the problem. Delete the addition of this handler, excuse me. You see, I'm adding this handler to the key press event. So if I remove it, that would solve the problem. Or I can go back here and undo and put it back. So that's fine. Either way is fine, but the appropriate way to get rid of it is, and I probably showed this last time, to come over here and actually go to the key press event and get rid of it here, right? So now if I go back to my code, you can see the references changes from 0 to 1. Now I can safely delete this without having to worry about it. And what I'm going to do instead, and I'll show you why, I'm going to change this. I'm going to change its name. I'm going to call it number. I'm going to spell number correctly. Number only key press. And you'll figure out why I'm going to call it number only key press in just a second. So, All right. So the E is one of the parameters, and we'll learn more about parameters, but basically it's a variable. So you know about variables. That's already got, this is how we get information into a method. So information is going to come in through these two, and when we send information to a method, that's how we do it. You can see in message box show, we're sending message into the show method. And this is an example of a method now. All right, so now I want to restrict to only numeric keystrokes. So it turns out, with a little bit of magic here, I'm going to use a conditional. Again, I'm going to make a choice, right? So conditionals make choices. So if the key, and the key press event argument contains information about what the character was, as you can see, using the dot operator to bring down the list of potential choices. And I do want to know about the key character. And I want to know if it's greater than, and this is the interesting part, 0. And actually, let me say, I'll say less than 0. If it's less than 0, and we're going to use the Boolean operator and it's greater than 9. Now think about why we can do this. We can do this because of the ASCII values. Remember that the ASCII codes are numeric values. So the truth is that key character information is really numeric. And the guys who set up the table were smart. They put all the zeros and 9, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 within the same block, and they put them in numerical order so that 0 comes lower in the list than 1 and so forth. So it allows you to do things like this that can be handy. Now, it turns out that this indicates it's not in that range. It's less than 0, meaning it's not 0, it's below it, and it's greater than 9. This means this character is not numeric. There are other ways to do it, but I wanted to show you this. You could have said something like is digit, I believe. Char is digit would also do the same thing. But I wanted to emphasize the nature of characters being numbers and get you to see a Boolean operation and operation. Okay, so now what I want to do is I will set handled to true. So what would normally happen is this key code would go on and would automatically be added to the text of the text box in question. Instead, I'm going to say, you know what, I've handled this, don't worry about it, which effectively is going to ignore it. It will not add it to it because it will say, oh, he handled that previously, so I don't have to do whatever it is that I was supposed to do with it. We're done with this keystroke. Now, if I set it to false, then later it would process it as expected, and we'll see that in just a second. And we'll know that if this is working properly, only the numbers 0 through 9 will be allowed to be added. However, what I haven't done yet is remember that this has no references. Remember that I removed that reference up here on the key press event. Let's see. And what I'm going to do is select it. Now you notice it came up in my dropdown. The reason it comes up is it has the right form. This method is of the expected form for a key press event, so it could be accepted as a handler. If I have other methods, but they don't show up in this list. Only the methods of the appropriate form show up. So I'm going to go ahead and add it. All right. So go ahead and start. And if I type in a D, it goes in. If I type in an E, it goes in. If I type in a 3, it goes in. So that didn't work. let's go back to my code. Key character. Oh, well, why didn't it work? Well, I've asked it for basically to be two things that it can't possibly be. I've asked it to be the character less than 9 and greater than 9, less than 0 and greater than 9, and that's impossible. So what I really wanted was a Boolean OR. So let's go back and try it again. And let's see. I press F, nothing happens. I press 4. I press 6. I press the decimal. That doesn't go in either. So again, I'd have to make some modifications there to get that to work for a decimal number, right? I'd want to accept at least one decimal. And also, notice, this is interesting, the backspace doesn't work. So that's another place you might do a fix. I'm not going to do that right now. Because what I want to show you now is I've created that single method, but now I can reuse it. Because I have the same problem in the years in the US, don't I? So now I can go down here, find the key press event, and go ahead and add it. Sorry about that. The virtual machine sometimes is a little tricky when I'm over at the edge. I probably should just extend this myself and stay away from the very edge of the screen. I have multiple screens, and sometimes it jumps when I'm over at the edge, out of the machine and back in, which can be problematic. Okay, so enough of my fooling around. Let's try it. So hopefully, again, I can enter numbers here, but I cannot enter letters. Does it do the same thing for this one? Yes, it does. Excellent, excellent. All right. So I've restricted what the user can add to the text box using the key press event. I'm handling the key press event at least partially manually. I'm still letting the text box handle it if it is an appropriate numeric character. Okay, but I still have another problem. And this problem is, what if they forget to put anything in? I'll put in some nice numbers here. They were U.S. citizens for 4,545 years. That's a long time. They probably are old enough, I'm guessing, but it turns out that I didn't enter anything. So when it goes to do this convert, it still crashes. So I haven't completely solved this problem. So now we're going to look a little bit at exception handling. So exception handling, errors are a possibility, particularly when you get users and user input. They may input something you don't expect or out of bounds. And it's bad form, very bad application if you crash. You like to handle it. You might, handle it and say, I'm going away now because I can't really handle what you've given me. But, or more often you can give them another shot to enter it, right? So in this case, I have this convert. Let's go ahead and stop this. Now, what should I do? Well, if you're not sure, a lot of times Google can be your friend. And you can see here, again, this is going right into the Microsoft library, MSDN, and I can go in here and take a look. and see what it gives me. And what we're going to find is it gives me this nice example of here's an int result, and I'm trying to do this convert on it. I put it in a try catch block. And you notice there's two kinds of exception. There's an overflow exception, which we'll talk about later, and format exceptions. This would be if they put a number too large, like 2 billion or something, which we can, again, in our text box, can restrict how many characters it'll accept to prevent this from happening. So we're not going to worry about that too much. But this format exception will occur if it's empty. Now, we could simply just do a check to make sure it's not empty, and if it's empty, jump over this code. But let's go ahead and try to do this try exception, because it is something that's in Chapter 3. It's a little early for that, in my opinion, but we'll see what we can do, right? So first, we have to get the code that might throw an error into the try block. So we're going to throw it up here. And notice I'm not including the declaration of it. And that is because this is a specific scope. So what would happen is if I declared it inside, if I said int age here and didn't have it declared above there, it would only be available inside this block, which I actually am going to need it later, right? I'm going to need age down here. Okay, and it's complaining now because it's like, wait a second, you have a try block, which means you must have a catch. And if you look back at this code here, you will see the catch we want is the format exception one. Right. So what do we want to do about that? Well, we will do a message box show. Something along these lines, right? Please enter age. Notice it's going to give me a little indicator. I must have a semicolon there at the end. Good. Okay. So now, the problem with this is going to be, well, it'll still work, sort of. It'll give me this message, but then, of course, it's going to continue with this code. But let's try it out. Let's see what happens. So I'll put in, we'll say U.S. citizen. So notice, it gives me this message about whether or not it was successful or not, right? Which is sort of problematic, because the truth is, I probably don't want anything, right? Let's see if it'll let me. You know, if I get to this point, it's like, hey, dude, it's over. You know, I can't continue. So I will return. And many people will complain about having multiple return statements in a method. I am not one of those people. If you get to the point where you can no longer continue, you should exit. I could try to contain everything within this box, within this try, and then put the catches at the end. That can work. The difficulty being, will I be able to know which one of these things went wrong? And in fact, we'll see here in this case, I could put both the years and the age in here. Again, one of the things I could do instead of that is do an if statement, say if the years and age dot text length is 0, you know, give a message box. There's several ways to go about this. Let's go ahead and see what happens with this. So let's go U.S. citizen. And there we go. Now it's just saying, please enter age. It's not continuing on with the rest of this code because I use this return statement. And what the return statement does is simply exit the method no matter what. Now, notice the reason I just have a return is because this method returns void, which means nothing. And we'll learn more about that later. But what we've seen so far here is we've seen the addition of another event handler. We've seen the use of a combining Boolean values with Boolean operators, in this case the OR. And we have seen handling of an exception. And so that's about it. That's a lot of work for one day. So we will probably see this on Wednesday. We'll try to handle some exceptions and do some compound Boolean expressions such as this. All right, that's it.